Greetings, everybody, on this fireside conversation. We have an amazing guest tonight, as you know, Dr. Kate Evans. And Kate's already given us an introduction to some of the amazing work that she's doing in Makgadikgadi Pans in Botswana, but she has a long history of working with elephants. So from Kate's introduction that we had on the invitation, I just was perked to ask some really intriguing questions. So I have done some elephant research comparing not the male elephant behavior, but mother elephant behavior. And the elephant behavior that I researched was looking at the behavior of elephants who'd had a good history, a good family setup, and those elephants whose elders, the matriarchs, the older elephants, the aunts and uncles, the older sisters and brothers had been culled in the late 1980s. And I was very privileged to be able to have two groups of elephants from those two different family setups in one place. So I was pretty intrigued when Kate mentioned that she had not only studied the adolescent elephants who'd had normal upbringings, but some who had been reintroduced through captivity. So Kate, I just really wanted to ask you, because that really perked my interest, did you find any difference in the behavior between the adolescent elephants bred in captivity that you reintroduced back into the wild compared to adolescents who just had a normal family upbringing in the wild?
That's a great question. Well, firstly, they weren't bred in captivity per se, they were raised in captivity. So like your elephants that you were working with, they were Kruger-Carl orphans. And what I found, and it was a very small sample set. So during my PhD, it was 3 young males, and then post-PhD, a young male, a young female, an adult female and 2 adult males. And when it comes to the adolescent males, there wasn't any sort of outstanding differences. What was apparent was the individual differences. And this was first highlighted by the work up in Amboseli, actually, and Joyce Paul's work, that this and Phyllis Lee and Cynthia Moss's work on that long-term incredible study up there, in that this individual decisions about when they leave their herd and become independent, and also the decision of the herd in some respects. So if there's a young male sort of hanging around too long, they might be encouraged to leave if they're if it's their time to go. They're adolescents, they're going through puberty, and with that comes some behavioral changes. So what was apparent and what worked well is we released one individual by himself, and he was very much a home buddy, I guess you would say, a homeboy. He really wasn't that ready for being independent in his mind, I don't think. So it took him a long time to gain the confidence to explore. And he would literally come to what I would assume to be sort of the edge of where he'd been. So these individuals would range during the day and then go back to a boma at night, and would stop and hesitate. So by that, I mean, he would lift one of his legs and rock it back and forth. And more often than not, he would turn back rather than going over this sort of invisible boundary. And then we released 2 young together, and they were much more exploratory, which, if we relate that to the wild, it makes sense if you leave with a cousin or a related individual that you might be more exploratory, more confident to go off into bull society and explore outside your natal range. And again, the work up in Amboseli and other work has shown that they often leave with a cousin, a related individual from the herd, and go off. And it can be a very long process, this independence. So they might go, come back for the day, go again, a couple of weeks, come back. So it is very individual. And I think that was similar to what we were finding in the wild individuals. When it comes to home range and land use, over time, they were using similar ranges, and as in size and resources, and their feeding habits or anything like that weren't any different. And they seem to be socializing with the wild individuals as other wild individuals would as other adolescent male elephants would. So there wasn't so many apparent differences between them. And I think because it was in their natural process to leave that herd. I mean, they had an unusual herd, absolutely, but as young males, this is what's coming. But yeah, as I said, it's very individual and a very small sample size.
Wow, that's very interesting, because if you think about children, children who have not such good attachments with their parents, or have some problems at home where they don't have a lot of confidence, it's quite interesting that their natural curiosity is kind of limited. Their natural ability to ask for help is limited. So it was quite interesting that you saw that from the one elephant. But yes, obviously, when you have a friend or a family member, to go out and explore with, well, that makes things a little bit more easy. But yes, quite interesting that they were very similar in their natural intuitive behaviors, I guess, to relate to the other elephants and to find and forage, find food in the right kind of places, connect in with other bull elephants. I think it's probably easier because, as you're saying, that would have been their natural tendency anyway. I know because of the Kruger cull in certain situations, there were adolescent elephants, I think some in Shushu and Filosi, some at Madikwe Game Reserve, where because they hadn't had the training from older bull elephants, or their must was not suppressed, their testosterone full must was not suppressed, they were doing some really unusual things, like trying to kill rhinos, which is a very unusual elephant behavior. So they were kind of a little bit roguish. And I remember Joyce Poole, who you kind of worked together with at Amboseli, one of the solutions that she found to that problem was bringing in older mentors or older bull elephants who would not only teach these youngsters how to behave appropriately, but also would suppress their massive testosterone levels, and they would stop the killing of the unusual terrorist type behaviors. Maybe that's not the right thing to call it. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Joyce Poole, we didn't work. I'm just aware of her work up in Amboseli, and the team up there. I've not had that privilege, but they've obviously done some incredible work and long-term monitoring, which is what I set up was my goal. Whilst I'm incredibly proud of getting a PhD, that was never my goal. My goal was to have a long-term monitoring project, and I think that gives us so much insight into species that are so long-lived. If you're there studying for a PhD like I was, I mean, I had, again, the opportunity for 3 years fieldwork, which is unusual, but that is just a snapshot. And afterwards, and I continued in the Delta for 10 years, there was a massive ecological shift, which unsurprisingly had an impact on the elephants we were seeing in the area, and therefore the social interactions as well. So yeah.
What was the ecological shift? What was the change?
Oh, it became much wetter in the Western Delta. Oh. So that changed the species diversity, or the species that were able to utilize that area, and we were seeing more females. So when I was doing my PhD, it would dry up on the non-flood season. So the Okavango Delta is fairly unique in that it doesn't have these wet dry, as discussed in sort of East Africa and South Africa. You have a wet dry, wet being the rainy season. Where we are, the rainy season comes along and then we have floods as well in the Delta. So it's a very different ecosystem. So that's what the change is. When it comes to this unusual behavior that was being shown in these young males, and that was Rob Slotto did some interesting papers, if anyone's interested in reading them, particularly looking at the Pilanesberg, which was also an area, and it was farmland which they made into a national park. So they introduced lots of wildlife, including elephants, and they took orphans from the Kruger National Park. And so at the beginning all was well, young males and young females doing elephant things, but they were all very young. As you said, they didn't have any older individuals to guide them. And when these young males came into puberty, as happens in young males, they had a surge of testosterone, but they didn't have this protracted adolescent, which is what's normal in elephants. And it is one of the longest adolescent periods in mammals, in that they'll come into puberty between the ages of 10 and 19, so on average 14, 15, but they won't get the opportunity to mate in a natural population until their early, maybe even mid-30s, because of this dominance hierarchy, female selection as well, competition by the males. So if you're a female and you're going to be pregnant for 2 years, 22 months, you want to ensure that your offspring is going to be as strong as possible. And the way you can assess that is by mating with a big male. Sure. Male elephants continue to grow throughout their lives. And so the bigger the male, the older. And he's saying to you, look, I know where food and resources are. My genes are strong. I've survived this long. Because being a male elephant's pretty tough, to be fair. So yeah, there's female selection. So these young females are like, I'm not interested in you. Why would I be interested in you? You're like 12 years old or whatever it is. And so the theory is that these young males went to go and look for other big grey things that might be interested in mating with them, started interacting with the rhinos. And sadly, that became a very aggressive interaction because the rhinos are very confused, unsurprisingly.
Absolutely.
And yeah, in Pilanesberg, I think it was 44 or 42 rhinos were killed by elephants, by these aggressive interactions. So Joyce Poole went down there and said, well, you don't have any big old males. And so they immediately introduced some big old males from Kruger. And that helped, that suppressed must. Now, we don't know how that happens. We presume there's physical interactions, and we also presume there's chemical interactions. So one example I can allude to in my study area was when these young males were in human care. They one young male came into must, the first one we released actually, and must in males is very distinctive. They're very smelly. Mm-hmm. They dribble urine. In full-blown must, they have what's called green penis syndrome, which for a long time was thought to be a sexually transmitted disease, but is actually just must. So they dribble urine continuously, and that's releasing their chemical communication as they walk along. It's telling other males that I'm in must, watch out, but also females, I'm in must. And therefore I'm a big strong male. And he was doing that. He was protected in a boma, and a wild adult male came along, and that male immediately went out of must, suppressed. So there was no physical contact, so there must have been some chemical audible communication that told him that no, you're not ready for must, time to come out of it, otherwise you're going to be in trouble.
So how important do you think, we're going to be doing a Awaken the Wild Within for refinement at Amboseli. So that's very exciting. So you've had a little bit of insight about how amazing the elephants are there. But because we're dealing with sports people who've really reached their peak and now looking at a different kind of life change, a different stage in life, and also businessmen who have also had years of amazing experience and been very successful. And are there any kind of valuable life insights here? Is it important in an organization or a sports team to have the older bulls calming down the vibrant, ready to go, buzzing youth? Do you have any thoughts about that, Kate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we as humans generally, unfortunately, put ourselves aside of or on top of nature and don't acknowledge that we're part of nature, an important part of nature, and we are a part of nature as in other species are important. And whilst the elephants look completely different to us, And, you know, worldwide, most people know what an elephant looked like. They're so iconic. But if you just take a moment to think about them, they are really unusual with their big ears and long trunks and you know, being so large. And yet the way they raise their young, the way their social interactions work within the females and within the males, and I'm generalizing here hugely, obviously, they're very similar to us. And one thing I've learned by studying male elephants is the importance of elders, particularly within young males. You know, if they don't have someone to look up to, let's say, or someone to mentor them, or just someone to show them what it is to be a big, old and successful male, then they're going to try, and those boundaries will continuously get pushed, and that's when these unusual behaviors come in within elephants, as we've just discussed. And it's been shown within human societies, young boys, if they don't have, you know, those boundaries put in place and someone to aspire to, someone to look up to and admire and learn from, importantly, in a caring way, not a dominant way, but a caring way, then then they can look for, a bit like the elephants did. They were going around in gangs in some reports, and you know, compete with each other, which is a natural thing to do within any sex, but compete with each other to an aggressive and detrimental way. And I think sports people, because they're held on such a high pedestal in many cultures, are in a very powerful position to have a very important role to play for young people coming up underneath them, or, you know, not even related to them because they're given so much TV time and radio time. And their personal choices have a massive impact on young minds. So I think it comes with a high level of responsibility if you are a successful sports person. And when you are so successful, that comes with a lot of opportunities as well, to positive or negative. So I think there's a lot of pressure on them to behave themselves.
Really, and being on a pedestal is quite precarious sometimes.
Yeah, but they are, you know, by being a successful sports person, they are very committed, and that is an attribute which again can be passed on. So once they're, I guess, past their prime per se, they're not, as in competitive, they're not past it by any stretch of the imagination. Sure. They have a really important role to play, whether that's within their sports or within their culture and their communities, by being that leader. You know, they've worked hard to be a leader, and they can take that on board and become a leader in another thing.
Absolutely. They've gained such amazing life insights, life experience, you know, how to deal with resilience, how to deal with failures, how to deal with success, you know, so many very important life understandings. So we're really excited about taking the participants to Amboseli to learn from the elephants. So Kate, I know you must have many elephant stories, but let's just end off with one that you think would be very valuable for the people who will be participating in the Awaken the Wild Within at Amboseli. Any kind of amazing elephant story you'd like to share with us?
I'd like to share two, if I may.
Absolutely.
So one is relationship between man and elephant, and the other is the relationship within elephants. So the one between man and elephants was this young male I released, was released, and I was involved with monitoring and seeing how he adapted. You know, the main concern with these elephants that had been in human care, that they would seek out humans and could be, you know, potentially very dangerous. Sure. So I spent a lot of time with these elephants ensuring A, that didn't happen, and B, collecting data to compare to those wild individuals that I was studying as well. And one day, this young male he came up to me, which was very unusual. So whilst he was very used to me being there, I had arrived on the day before I think he was going to be released. So he didn't know me as a human that cared for him or, you know, fed him or whatever. but he obviously knew me as someone that was probably quite annoying to him because I kept following him around. And then one day he came up to the vehicle, which, as I said, was very unusual. He didn't do that with me. And I was like, oh, that's strange. And I hadn't noticed anything unusual beforehand. But he then was, with his trunk, was touching his leg and then coming up to me, and then again going down and touching his leg and lifting it. And I realized that he was injured.
Oh, wow.
So his one, I think it was his right ankle, was very, very swollen. So he'd seen me as something that could potentially help him. So I called it in to the mahouts that had cared for him for so long, and once released, we changed how we interacted with him. We didn't have those positive reinforcement interactions that he was used to. The decision was made to deliver some medical help. So the mahouts came out, and the vet came and helped him and gave him some anti-inflammatories. We think he'd twisted it or something. So yeah, that was the one. And there's other examples of that where
it's amazing that he knew that you could be a source of help, and also wonderful that the elephants, like they always say, have such long memories. So they remembered the people who had cared for them and allowed them close again.
Yes. Now, going on from that, I'm gonna go a little bit longer. Is that when I left that area, we're now based in Makgadikgadi. We were based in the Delta, and for a while I would go back and come back and go forth, what with studies, etc. And weirdly, every time I went back, he would turn up.
Amazing.
So my brain says pure beautiful. My heart says he knew I was coming.
Yeah, no, that's so amazing. Awesome.
So the other one was the very limited. We haven't done much studies on relatedness within male social groups. So we know that there is a highly fission fusion society. So again, similar to humans, women in human societies tend to, and again, I'm generalizing, tend to be the ones that kind of keep those contacts, remember birthdays, anniversaries, on a social level, need more constant contact. And males, they might meet down the pub every 6 months or a year, and that's perfectly fine. And they don't think, well, why haven't you been in touch with me for 6 months? It's irrelevant.
Yeah,
it's still as good friends. Yeah.
Sure.
So they have a very fission fusion society, and because a male may not get the opportunity to mate until their early mid to late 30s, then it's unlikely that he'll have interactions with his offspring. They may do, we don't know. But cousins can leave with each other and potentially stay. So there are related individuals, but we don't think between the elders and the youngsters, an area to explore and examine. So altruistic behavior would not be expected because that's generally related. So you will help a related individual. And what I saw was a large group of males, and there was a few youngsters and big old balls and the kind of all the age groups. And I had been with them for about an hour or so, and then suddenly something scared me. I don't know what it was. And they immediately huddled, as you would expect a herd to do, with the elders on the outside and the youngsters in the middle. And that really blew me away. I was like, well, that's sure. Really, that, what's going on there? Why are they doing that? And that sort of helping of these youngsters. And I saw it with a young, I don't even know if it's a male or female, that should not have been away from its herd. It was far too young. There was a big old bull, probably early 30s, and he was with it, and the young one was following it. Now, I couldn't follow it into deep bush, but maybe he was taking it back to the herd. I don't know. So there's sort of helping behavior again, sort of alludes to their high level intelligence and high level of empathy, not only for each other. We know that they grieve and recognize individuals, but potentially for other injured animals as well. There's many videos out there showing elephants interfering with a crocodile that's attacked a wildebeest or something like that. So there's definitely empathy within these animals as well. So those are the 3 stories. I've got another one in there.
That's wonderful, Kate. Really appreciate that. I know when I was looking at the families of elephants in Pongola Game Reserve, I did find that when our dominant bull elephant, his name was Ngani, when he was around, the matriarch who could be quite assertive in her matriarchal position. She would be a lot more relaxed when the big bull elephant was around. So it seemed that he had a bit of a protective role in, and when he was around, they felt a little bit safer. But I've never seen bull elephant lager like you're saying. But when I was working with the elephants at Pongola, the elephants who'd had normal social behavior, normal family history, they would do that. The mothers would lager, whereas what we call the orphan elephants, who are now becoming first-time mothers, they weren't that good at that sort of protective lagering, which was quite an interesting observation. But there's just maybe one story I'll end off with is along the lines of protectiveness, which was quite interesting for me at the time, was there was a little 4-year-old bull elephant, maybe a bit younger, maybe he was sort of 3.5. And we came across the orphan elephant. So he was the firstborn to one of the orphan mothers. Her name was Charm, and he got called Charlie because nobody knew at first whether he was male or female. So they very diplomatically called him Charlie. And when we came in, we startled them, which was not great. But Charm kind of turned around and she almost had this kind of attitude as, hey, next time knock before you enter, just be a little bit more, just don't barge in, And Charlie did a very interesting interaction. First of all, he charged at the vehicle, which was very cute and comical because he was little with his little ears flapping in his trunk, but it was kind of like a protective action. And then he did something really strange. He went and suckled from Charm. And she kind of pushed him off because she kind of was saying, hey, I've weaned you already. You shouldn't be suckling from my breast at this stage of your life. And I really pondered about that behavior. And then it might be right, it might be wrong, but it kind of linked in for me about how in divorce situations, when parents are emotionally challenged with all the losses and changes that they're going through, and they're feeling really vulnerable. Often children will become adult children. They will take on adult roles with very inadequate skills to try and make the family situation safe. And it felt a little bit like that for me with Charlie, that he hadn't gone to suckle from his mother for his own reassurance. He'd gone to suckle to reassure her, because she got such a sort of shock in the situation. So I just found that all really very interesting. So there's so much we can learn from elephants. And I really appreciate your stories. I really appreciate your incredible research and understandings you've given to us today. So thank you very, very, very much, Kate. And to everybody who's listening in, really looking forward to introducing you to some of the most amazing animals in the world, the elephants. But we're going to say bye for now. Bye, Kate.
Thanks, Mandy. Bye, everyone.
Bye.